I want to shift gears now and go in a different direction than what we've been doing so far, and talk to you about a thing that I'll call the 7 pillars of leadership. Before I do that, though, a little introduction, a little story. I've often asked, what do you do since you retired? And people are interested in. And so I'll tell you a little how it works out. I get up early in the morning, as it's been my habit for many years, and the first thing I do is have a cup of coffee and read the paper. Paper comes at 3 o'clock at my house every day, and so I get up 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and read the paper. And so that goes pretty well, and later in the morning I have breakfast and another cup of coffee. And then after breakfast, I read the paper again. By that time, I've forgotten what I read the first time. I told that story to a group of hospital administrators in Dallas, and a gentleman came up and told me, well, stand by, it won't be long till you can hide your own Easter eggs. Now, Julie, maybe you'll figure out how to solve that problem someday. And then at another occasion in Clear Lake area, I shared that with a group of Rotarians, mostly whom were elderly. Now, elderly, by the way, as I've grown older, I've learned that elderly is anyone that's 10 years older than you are. And that seems to change every year as you grow older. And I didn't get a single chuckle from those gentlemen. But the 7 pillars of leadership, the source of that was, unfortunately, a little late in my career, I started thinking about this subject of leadership, and I read the books, which you've probably looked at. Colin Powell has 17. I understand he's expanded it to 18 principles of leadership, and guys like Ziegler has 21. Almost everyone who speaks about leadership has 18, 20, 21 principles of leadership. That's too many for me to remember, and I thought perhaps there's a half a dozen or so that really are the core things that are important. So today I want to talk to you about what I consider to be the 7 core pillars of leadership. And to give you a preview, those are, and number 1, and I think the most important. I didn't believe that when I was young. I thought the second one was the most important, but the most important is have the right attitude. It unlocks the future. The second one is technical excellence, and you heard me speak of that somewhat yesterday, but it is the foundation. The third one is character and have integrity, character and integrity. That's the glue that holds it all together. The fourth one is be involved in a passion for your work, a life's work that you have a passion for. It gives the joy of working. The fifth one is care for people. And there's a difference from caring for people and taking care of people. I'll talk about the difference later. The sixth one is be an agent of change. The world is changing, and if you're going to be a leader, you need to be able to be an agent of change as the world changes. And the seventh one is to be persistent and get the job done. Now, I originally only had 6, and now I have 7. You might guess which one of those are as I go through this. The first one is have the right attitude. Attitude can make a tremendous amount of difference in terms of how we get our work done and how we accomplish things. Thomas Jefferson reportedly said, and of course Thomas gets credit for a lot of things that someone else might have said, but he reportedly said, nothing can stop the man, and today would we say the man or a woman, with the right attitude, Nothing on earth can help the man or woman with a wrong attitude. Have you ever had people in your organization that had the wrong attitude? They were a problem. Nothing ever was quite right. There was always something to complain about. A person with the right attitude is eager, has a can-do attitude. He supports the team. He supports others. He or she supports others. They're cooperative. They work with the group. They may disagree with the boss, but they work with the boss and respect him. I've had the unfortunate occasion of having a person work for me one time that didn't respect the boss. Maybe it was my fault, but nevertheless, when you work for somebody, you ought to either respect them or go get yourself another job. You need to be a team member, a member that's working with the team. You need to have a positive attitude. I'll give you an example of that. After Skylab launched the lab to space, as many of you remember, solar arrays, one solar array was ripped off, another one was stuck half open. All of the insulation on the top of the vehicle was ripped off due to flutter during ascent. And the station was in difficult problems. The engineering team and the operations guys put the procedures together and an umbrella that went through a little hole in the airlock in the station that was about this big, that put out an umbrella that shaded the vehicle from the sun and saved the vehicle. During that time, the temperature in the Skylab went up to something like 135 degrees, which normally should be 75 or so. And the procedures for activation of the station and what the crew was going to do when they got there was completely rewritten by Neil Hutchinson and his team, who was the activation flight director. I had the privilege of going to Florida and delivering those new procedures to be stored on board the service module at that time, and had dinner with the crew before they were launched. And one of those crewmen was walking the halls, obviously in the crew quarters, obviously worried about the flight, and that particular individual said, well, I'll tell you, I'm just going to do what Pete tells me to. Pete Conrad was the commander. And then I talked to Pete and I said, Pete, do you want to talk about any of this stuff? And he looked me in the eye and said, no, I don't need to do that. You guys wrote them and I'll do it. That's having the right attitude. Of course, Pete and his crew went to orbit and did a fantastic job of recovering the Skylab. It all turned out wonderfully well. And of course, there's a lot more to that story than I'm able to tell you about today, including the eventually deploying a big solar sunshade to keep it warm and getting the stuck solar array open and so on and so forth. Another thing about the right attitude is about the guys who run a mile in 4 minutes. Before 1954, people thought the 4-minute mile was not possible. People would never be able to run the mile in 4 minutes. In 1954, Roger Bannister broke the barrier, if you will, and ran the mile in 4 minutes. That in itself, in retrospect, was not particularly unusual. In the next year, 27 people ran the mile in 4 minutes. But even that is not particularly outstanding as we look back. In the second year, in one race, 13 out of 13 runners beat the 4-minute mile. Now, what changed in 1954 and 1955? A bunch of people decided they could do it and went out and did it. It's a matter of having the right attitude. So with the right attitude, you can do great things. Just have the right attitude and decide that you're going to do it. Technical excellence, the foundation that allows you to accomplish great things. Will Rogers said you learn by 3 ways. He said you learn by reading about it, and you learn by observing others, and then he said, and some people have to learn the hard way by pissing on the electric fence. Unfortunately, some folks do it twice. But the point of all of that is there's a process of learning and learning about how to be a better human being and how to do a better job. Learning is a career function. It's not something you do in college. It's all over, and now you're all set. Learning is a continuous process as long as you're able to breathe. It's something that you ought to continue to do as long as you are able to draw breath. So Helen Keller, and you know Helen Keller was both blind and could not hear. She did not have any senses, learned how to communicate, and she said, no pessimist ever discovered the secrets of the stars. Our sailed an uncharted land, or opened a new heaven to the human spirit. She was indeed a great person that had a great insight to these things. And by the way, we should have used that slide on the first thing. That's on about the one of having the best attitude, the right attitude. A curious mind. You know, there's 2 questions we ought to ask: why and why not? Why do you want to do that, and why should we not do that? Both questions are applicable when we're pursuing an activity. We never graduate. We always continue this pursuit of knowledge and technical excellence. Difficult times. A good, and if I could have the next chart, we're not smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. Sometimes difficult times is the best for learning. Challenger in Columbia was an opportunity to learn and move forward in terms of not only how to protect the vehicle, but how to manage the vehicle. It's a marvelous opportunity to learn new things. Neil Armstrong, the first person who walked on the moon, was a good example of a person who pursued excellence all of his life. He was, of course, a pilot in the beginning. Later flew the X-15, NASA astronaut on Gemini 8, which I had the opportunity to be the crew activity planner on about the 5th or 6th revolution. He had previously docked to the Agena spacecraft. The Gemini spacecraft, what we would call a service module today, had a stuck-on thruster, and the vehicle began to spin up. The crew initially thought it was a problem with this Agena spacecraft that they had docked with, and undocked, separated. The conservation of energy built up the rotation of the Gemini spacecraft to 270 degrees a second. Think about that. That's almost 2/3 of a revolution every second. Ken can probably tell you that that's fast. Neil activated the entry propellant system, the entry RCS system, and deactivated the service module reaction control system, and damped the rates, used 2/3 of the fuel out of the entry system and damped the rates on the Gemini, and the flight director elected to land the Gemini spacecraft and the crew off the coast of Japan a couple of revolutions later. Neil had spent a long time being ready for that. Dave Scott told me after the flight that, you know, Tom, if I'd have been in the left seat, we'd still be rotating. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it gives you an idea. Neil was ready for that day. To give you an idea of the kind of person he was, and he was flying the lunar lander trainer out at Ellington one day, and it was a metal device he set up on top of a platform and had a jet engine on the bottom and control thrusters out on the, and the control system failed, began to go upside down. He ejected. It had an ejection system. Ejected him up to 200 or 300 feet, and then he landed out at Ellington. I'm told he went back to the office and continued to work for the rest of the day. I tell you, if that happened to me, I wouldn't have been to work for the rest of the day. I'd have been home thanking the Lord that I was still alive. But anyway, Neil was an unusual guy, a person who pursued technical excellence. Could I have the next slide? And of course, we need to not be afraid of the storms, because they are the opportunity to learn as we go through life. The third area is character and integrity. And first, a couple of words about what they are in my view. Character is who we are without mask. We all have masks that we wear, and we pretend to be people that we're not. And character is what you are when no one is looking. Integrity is in consistency between how you behave in public and how you behave when no one's looking. Integrity is based on bedrock principles, which are always true and enduring, and not situational. It's not based on emotion, but it's based on bedrock principles that guide your life and direct you. The reason character and integrity is so important in leadership is because people who believe that you're providing leadership and direction because they have faith that you are doing what you think are the right thing, they'll follow you even sometimes when they disagree with you. There are examples of those in the system, and of course I'm a bit biased since I've known the gentleman for many, many years. He worked for me on 2 or 3 different occasions, went to Russia for me for 6 months and Shuttle Mir. But Bill Gerstenmaier, in my view, is an epitome of someone with character and integrity. I'll also tell you a story about my relationship with the Russians in Shuttle Mir. I was a program manager for the Russian system. A icon, as Ken talked to us about, in the Russian society. He is a cosmonaut that had been on their space station on 2 different occasions. I understand he went back the second time as somewhat as a volunteer when one of the other crewmen was not able to fly, came back and became a national hero. And the bottom line, he was a crusty fellow. He was tough. He was not interested in helping me in any way. You'd often heard that the way to work with the Russians and get along with the Russians and share and so on and so forth is to have meals with them, drink with them, and so on and so forth. we did some of that. We had them to our home, 6 or 8 of them, and so on and so forth. Never quite affected Valerie. We had a meeting. We always wrote protocols after meetings, and one time in Moscow while we were waiting to sign the protocol that was being edited, Valerie was complaining. He didn't like this program. He didn't like Shuttle Mir. Wasn't good for him, wasn't good for the space agency, wasn't good for his country. Everything was bad. And my reply to Valerie is, I said, well, Valerie, I understand that. Valerie Ruman, by the way. But we've got to make this thing happen. Both of our countries want to do it, and you and I have to work together and make it happen, so I'm sure that we'll be able to do that. And Valerie's response was something like this. He said, and this, of course, is all through a translator. He said, Tommy, I tell you what, it's kind of like this. When I invite people to my home, what I do depends. Some people, I spread out everything I have on the table, and some people I put a little bit on the table. And it was clear which end of the table that I was on. Now, time passed, and I went on to be the shuttle program manager, and Bill was working for me, and down in Florida, and Valerie was there for some occasion, Bill Reedy, and Valerie was there and had a discussion with Valerie. And Valerie said to him, what are you doing nowadays, Bill? Bill had been in Russia also, so Valerie knew him very well. And Valerie, I need to back up a little bit. I never got a concession out of Valerie on any situation unless it was benefited the Russian space agency. And we did dozens, many things to help him, including building a cutter to cut loose a solar panel that stuck on one of their missions and providing it to them. Theirs didn't work very well. The one that our EVA guys built worked. They used it to cut the solar panel loose. But anyway, Valerie said to Bill Bill told him, well, I have the opportunity to work for Tommy Holloway in the shuttle upgrades program. And Valerie looked him in the eye and said, you know, Bill, you're a lucky man to be working for Tommy. Although he never gave me anything in terms of supporting our side of the deal, I thought, including flying a little bottle, a catch bottle about this size that weighed 3 kilograms on the Soyuz. In the end, he had a great deal of respect for us because of what we did and how we operated with him. So character does matter. Passion for life work. You folks invest 30% of your time in your work. It's best that you do something that's a joy, something that you love to do. You were created for a purpose, and if you're not doing the purpose, you need to look for the purpose of your life. You need to love your work. You need to not be one of those folks that says, thank goodness it's Friday, then I can go home and go fishing and whatever one does. I had the opportunity to work in human spaceflight for 40 years, and my wife will tell you that I often wondered where the week had gone when it was over, instead of thinking, thank goodness the day has gone. The fifth thing is caring for people. It's not taking care of people. It's not just taking care of people. Taking care of people is getting their promotions when they deserve it, give them the allotted amount of square footage, and everybody gets the window or whatever. That's the business of taking care of people. They get what they deserve. But caring for people is caring about them as a human being and helping them become all they can be. Finding the right job for them, putting the square pegs in the square holes and the round pegs in the round holes, and getting people so that they can be productive in the work that they do. Assisting people to become what they will, training them, sharing with them, mentoring them, encouraging them, doing more than the normal business of just taking care of them, helping people become all they can be. I know we had the opportunity when I was in the shuttle program, a fellow that had been kicked around the Johnson Space Center for a number of years, quite frankly, because he was not a contributor to his organization. We inherited him by direction. Some of you have probably been there. And we were fortunate enough to find an administrative job for that individual that was required to be done. It was not invented. It was something that the government required us to do. And he took a hold of that job, become an active, exciting, and felt good about himself, probably for the first time in his career. Find the right job for the right person. On the other hand, on occasion, there's people that you need to send on somewhere else. They need to find another job, perhaps even terminated. Get people in the right job, hire the right people, move the wrong people to the right place, make them the right people, help people find a job that fits. Don't be a goody two-shoe. When the day comes and someone is being disruptive and non-contributing to the organization, you need to send them on their way. The sixth principle is be an agent of change. The world changes rapidly. In 1984, desktop computers came to be. 1984, what is that, 36 years ago? Not very long ago. Today, you folks, I haven't quite got there yet, but you carry around in your pocket a capability that far succeeds what was invented in 1984. The world is changing, and you need to change with it. Human space flight is changing, and you'll need to change with it. And it will evolve to a better way. And it may be some bumps along the road, may go down a path that's not the best in the world for a bit of time, but in the end, it'll evolve to a better human spaceflight program. But people who are agents of change is the one that makes the improvements in the system. An agent of change is improving how we do business. They improve in society. It's people who are willing to change and willing to participate in changes that really move us in a more positive and a more productive area. Without change, we would we would never make big progresses in society. The story is told about building a bridge across the Niagara River back in the last century between Canada and the United States. And a contractor bid on that, but he forgot how he didn't take into consideration how he was going to initially get established. And all the engineers worked on that for a number of days and couldn't come up with a solution. And finally, because they couldn't establish the initial transition across the river, finally a 12-year-old boy gave them the solution. He said, well, what you need to do is get a bow and arrow, shoot an arrow with a string on it across the river, have the string tied to a rope to pull across the river, and the rope would then pull a steel cable across the river that would become the backbone of building the bridge across the river. Creative minds can solve impossible problems when we are agents of change. The seventh pillar is be persistent. I am an individual that was not the smartest guy on the block by any stretch of the imagination, but I believe I was one of the more persistent individuals. Persistent in terms of making sure that we got it right, both in terms of what I personally did and what the team did. Sometimes it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy to get it right. Now understand that there's some things that you don't pursue with that kind of vigor, but there's other things that you need to pursue to the end to make sure you get it right. The story is told about Henry Kissinger, who of course had staff members to help him develop policies and so on and so forth. And his favorite question was, have you done the best you can do? And of course, many people would say, well, Dr. Kissinger, I guess not. And his answer was always, go back to your office and get back to work. Do it right, be persistent, and get it done correctly. That's a matter of self-discipline and being able to go back and correct. Also, one of the more important things, I believe, in terms of our business of space operations and operating in space is always be willing to look back and critique yourself and say what went right, and probably more importantly, what didn't go right, and do that with an objective mind. Sometimes we believe because we did something and nothing bad happened that it was okay. But quite often we were lucky that it turned out okay. So objective critique of what we've been doing is always appropriate in the business of being persistent. So there's 7 pillars. I suggest to you that they're the basic pillars of the so-called 21 principles of leadership. First is have the right attitude. It unlocks the future. Technical excellence, which is a foundation for everything. Character and integrity, the glue that holds it all together. Passion for life's work makes it a joy. Care for people, it's a great multiplier. When you care for people, it will multiply. Be an agent of change, it's the enabler of great things in your life. And last, be persistent and get the job done right. Thank you very much.